Do you ever think about your earliest memories? The reason I bring it up is because despite trends, activities, and even people flowing into and out of my life, three things always stayed the same. I always loved and practiced the martial arts, I always loved monsters, and I've always loved Sonic the Hedgehog. Hell man, the reason that I got into breakdancing and freerunning was because I saw Sonic do it and I wanted to do it myself in real life. But as you can guess, just like Sonic was there as I grew up, I was around as he did too. Now, as anyone who has kept up with the franchise and lived through those periods can tell you, eventually we all have a breaking point, and for me, it was colors. It was a very long 7 years before Mania came around and reinvigorated my love for the series, and even longer still for Frontiers to show up. Then the game came out and was incredibly divisive, because of course it was, and not just among the muggles, but also with the Sonic fanbase itself. But that's why you're here, right? I think Sonic Frontiers might just be the perfect example of a 50-50 game, because 50% of the choices in this game are some of the best, smartest calls they've ever made in this series, and the other half are some of the choices that just make you want to scream, like come the hell on, I thought we learned from this already. So buckle up, because we're gonna go over why Sonic Frontiers is both the best and worst of Sonic the Hedgehog. My single biggest compliment to this game, and apparently the only one that is universally shared, is that the Sonic characters are actually characters again. This is incredibly relevant because all we've had for the last decade of Sonic is non-stop gags. And to go back to my earlier statement, that all started with colors. As the goats over at South Park have said,
we just don't respect it in terms of writing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because, there's basically, we always try to avoid, there's one thing we always try to avoid in South Park is gags. We hate gags. And so whenever we're bringing in new writers, we always know the gaggy writers, right? Which are the ones that no matter what you're talking about and how deep of an issue or whatever character arc or whatever it is, they're just throwing out a gag. And it's just like, yeah, and then he says this. And it's like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. That has nothing to do with that character. You're just throwing out a gag.
But before we go over how hard this game nailed the characterization, Ian Flynn, well-known writer for the Sonic comics, is finally in the writer's chair for one of the mainline games, and holy shit did I not envy the 2 decades of course correction he had to handle. But I'll be damned if he didn't pull it off. All 5 of the classic main characters are not only well written, but also pushed forward for the first time since SA2. I know it's annoying when YouTubers say something is well written without giving context, so let me shotgun an example for each character.
Hey, little bro. Feeling better?
Yeah. This whole experience gave me a kind of clarity. When this is all over, I think I need to go it alone for a while. I can't grow into my full potential if I always fall back on you. If that's okay.
You're free to go your own way. I guess you just grew up on me a little faster than I expected.
Are you saying I outpaced you?
Yeah, don't push it. It's gonna take some getting used to, but here's to you reaching new heights, partner.
Sonic, for the first time, shows just how much he values having Tails follow him around, while Tails finally decides to be truly independent in order to grow. Not only does this cement how they view each other, but Tails is the one in control of the conversation, by being the first one to crack a joke that is specifically teasing in nature towards Sonic, who replies in turn with a nice quip. Take notes, guys, because this is how you do quipping in a serious conversation. Tails' joke not only gives him power and puts him as Sonic's equal, but Sonic's clapback cements his role as the big brother in this relationship, all without taking away anything from the actual exchange itself. The parts that hold it back, however, are the writer's tendency to force a laughing cutaway, which will ruin your organic dialogue faster than anything else, alongside cutting back to Sage, who I believe is a really solid character that is just overly written.
It was so much easier accepting the future when they were simply enemies.
Don't get too far ahead.
Maybe we should just let them wrap it up on their own.
We have to see this through.
We still haven't found Tails. We've been wrangling children and taking detours the whole way.
Are you telling me You would leave behind someone in need?
No, but I'm also worried about you. You can't help anyone if you're stuck in limbo.
All right. Then hurry up and save me too, so we can find Tails.
Sounds simple enough.
Of course it was going to be this clip. It was either going to be this one or the Rose Field scene, but I went with this as an example of great writing because not only are there many firsts for this pair in the games, but it is handled with sincerity and speaks to a meta-narrative for the game itself. Amy is concerned about the indigenous life forms, while Sonic is annoyed at the detour. But notice how at first he pawns it off on their assistants, distracting from looking for Tails. And it isn't until Amy pushes back that Sonic lowers his guard and admits to being worried about her. And look at his face when he says it. Amy then relents and we get another 10 out of 10 look from Sonic. We've never had Amy question Sonic's moral character in the games, and we've never had Blue just let loose that he's worried about her. At least not with this amount of sincerity. And what's more is that there is no joke to speak of. The humor and quip comes from their relationship and dynamic. She tells him not only to hurry up, which is poking at our boy here, but to save her too, so that they can work together on finding Tails. The two is important, as that not only refocuses their goal of rescuing friends, but also sets her up as being capable of helping. That's why he grins like that. We then close out this exchange with another classic Sonic quip that helps ease her mind. Again, the quips in this script are for a reason beyond making the audience laugh. Finally, and this may well be coincidental, but the player has probably done quite a bit of running around in the game itself. So Amy's statements can be seen as a form of incentive to get the player to push forward with the story and come back to the side quests later. But now let's talk about Knuckles.
Some rescue. I'm still half ghost.
I'm working on it, okay?
What's going on with you?
Just a little side effect of the island's weird energy. What are you doing so far from home?
I was investigating some strange ruins when I was transported here, then got trapped.
Never a dull moment with you.
Just bring me up to speed.
Listen, help me find the Chaos Emerald so I can beat up some big robots. You'll be free and back to guarding the Master Emerald in no time.
Sounds like a plan.
Knuckles is immediately not only attentive to the fact that something is affecting Sonic, but also jokes about the nature of his rescue. Then the two start to exchange cracks at each other and information back and forth. And I'm sorry, but this version of Knuckles is definitely written more as Sonic's best friend rather than that guy I occasionally hang with. The only thing holding this scene in particular back is that there's just too much pausing between the lines. However, I think that's more with the mixing and the editing side of things as opposed to the writing itself. Back to the scene, Sonic is well aware of what Knuckles cares about, that being his job, and Knuckles wants to know what he can do to help out, all spiced up with a little banter. And there is a strong sense given to the audience for how they view each other. While Tails is very much the younger brother here, Amy and Knuckles are both friends. And while Sonic jokes with all of them, the way he jokes is different, as it should be, all without compromising who he is as a whole. This could honestly be the topic of an entire video by itself, and if you would like one, let me know down in the comments, or if this video gets 1,000 likes, I'll be happy to do it. But I'm saving Eggman for if that one ever comes to be. So now for the first negative against this game, the new characters themselves. As I've already stated, I think Sage is an absolutely fantastic addition to the cast, and frankly, Cubot and Orbot should be scrapped for parts. However, Sage has the big problem of just being overly written. There are so many examples of wonderful moments where I'm just like, oh man, you're so close. I just wish you stopped talking like 2 sentences earlier. And it's a shame because Ian is really flexing on this character, especially in regards to her relationship with her father. So much so that I believe there might have been some studio interference that pushed him to include lines that dumbed it down for the dipshit audience. The other issue comes from the main villain, the ancient civilization, the Cocos, and their interactions with the game setting as a whole. Don't worry, I'll be addressing the environmental and set-piece decisions in the next point. But real quick, let's talk about that main villain. So, the main villain for the vast majority of the game has zero identity. I'm not being a dick, this is its actual description on the wiki. And it's literally described as a force of nature as opposed to a character, and while this usually never works, well, it still doesn't here, but that's why it is truly one of the biggest missed opportunities of the franchise. Here is my hottest take on why that is. The end being nothing but a force of nature with no personality is the perfect chance to explore Sonic himself. Out of almost every character in Sonic, we know the least about the titular hero, and this would have been the best chance to take a look at his background. As interesting as a story can be, ultimately one makes it or breaks it by the actions and dynamics of the characters themselves. The end didn't need to be something, but it at the very least needed to bring something out of Sonic. While the end is much easier to take a stance on, the newly revealed origin of the Chaos Emeralds, Chaos himself, and the Chao is much more up to interpretation. Personally, I love that the Chaos Emeralds are alien in nature, because, seriously, what's the point of the Master Emerald otherwise? And that they tie the Ancients back to Chaos and the Chao. However, I do believe the Chao should have just been in Frontiers properly, and not as a fully interactable system like in the adventure titles, but for the sake of story and closure. However, I need to stress, we should give Ian full credit for this decision, as he revealed in an interview that it was his idea to tie the Ancients to the Chao for the sake of cohesion.
What was your first reaction and general thoughts on the new lore added in regards to the Chao and the Ancients?
Ancients caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting aliens to be the origin for the Chaos Emeralds and all that. The connection with the Chao was something that I pitched to make things feel cohesive-er. I didn't want there to be yet another random alien race. Oh, it's the Babylonians, it's the Black Arms, it's the Wisps, it's just all these aliens, and here they are. And I wanted to have more interconnectivity in the Sonic lore.
A choice that was excellently made when viewing the franchise as a collective whole. Sonic has a serious advantage over other classic platformers in that they have a world, characters, and continuity that people tend to care about and enjoy. The Chao and Chaos were at one point another example of video game gimmicks of the week, but by tying them into a narrative that Sega handed down to Ian as the backdrop for the next game, he not only made them impact the franchise going forward, but also provided context for a narratively random addition from Sonic Adventure. Wait, this is supposed to be a bad section. Well then, let's move on to the game itself and its presentation if we're going to talk about bad stuff. So I'm not going to give it the title of the first open world because Sonic Adventure was before that, and even then the earliest example would be Sonic Jam with the Sonic World feature. For better or worse, it's about damn time we finally had one to this degree of execution. For a long time, it was an exciting idea for the fanbase, and it was the subject of a number of indie games. Now I know, this just sounds like I'm handing out a participation trophy, right? That's because I am. This is where the positives end, because this game's open world feels like it came right out of the early PS360 era. Countless invisible barriers, a complicated map system, a shallow skill tree, bottomless fucking pits are all perfectly reasonable for a game from that time, but not for a modern experience. The naysayers are perfectly justified in their displeasure here. A lot of these decisions either feel contrived or unfinished, and the game had a moderate development cycle of 5 years. Another common criticism is with the art direction. The Starfall Islands don't feel like Sonic's world, and bouncing back and forth between the overworld and the reusing of Green Hill, Chemical Plant, and Sky Sanctuary for the millionth time is honestly really jarring. Seriously, Sega, this is a problem. It feels like the hub world is supposed to be the cyber world, not the other way around. You could argue it's a meta statement, as the Ancients are aliens, but no, the Ancients look like slightly edgier Sonic characters, and this still doesn't match their motif. It's been said before, but it demands acknowledgement. This feels like a Skyrim or a Dark Souls inspired environment, and it also looks like it came from that era. While those are excellent games, it comes off like Sega took the wrong lesson here. Rather than a drab open world, they should have trusted their own aesthetic and focused on how well Dark Souls and Skyrim made those settings interconnect. And while an environment that looks outdated isn't necessarily a bad thing, it doesn't work here because Sonic himself doesn't look like he belongs in this environment. And hey, speaking of both pulling from another franchise and missing the point, that brings me to the next topic, the gameplay itself. Unpopular opinion, but while I'm not a fan of the Shadows of the Colossus knockoff enemies, I love the greater emphasis on combat and the Devil May Cry approach they took. Sonic's new skills are really well animated, and the multiple battles with Super Sonic feel appropriately scaled like major events. I know what you're thinking though. If that's all the case, then what's the big deal with the gameplay? What are people complaining about? Well, it's kind of like the Star Wars prequels. Most of the ideas are fantastic on paper, but when executed, completely shat the bed. What's the point of all this space if we can only interact with it the same way we've been interacting since Sonic War Soaps? Ultimately, we're still just running around, grinding on various rails that appear out of nowhere and boosting from place to place. And you know what? Speaking of which, can we please ditch the boost formula at this point? Something I think everybody's missed is that, much like giving Sonic a run button in Lost World, the game becomes programmed around the enhanced speed rather than the default. So while boosting makes you go fast, the levels have to be designed around that, which leads to people naturally holding down the button, getting hit because they can't see the obstacles, and then boosting again to get back up only to speed into the next trap. The logical answer to this is to stop boosting, idiot, and just learn the stage. But then Sonic just feels too slow. By adding in the boost and programming the game around that setting, you are not only making your development time longer because you have to make the levels bigger, but you are also setting up the players for failure by actively disincentivizing them from taking their time. If we remove the instant gratification from boosting, or just went back to the tried and true spin dash, we can get back to a sense of mastery and accomplishment as opposed to instant gratification. You might be saying that one can also just master the stages alongside the boost mechanic, and you are absolutely right. But I have to double down on the point that the boost is actually the game's default speed. So if one is able to maintain boosting the entire stage, they're only playing it at normal speed anyways. Finally, not to blow Sonic Mania or their team any more than everyone else already has, but the solution to the problem was invented with the drop dash, which is in this game. Drop dashing is the answer to getting back up to speed alongside the good old spin dash itself. But enough about the movement, it's combat time. The combat too feels like it missed the point of its inspiration. It feels like 80% of the enemies in Sonic Frontiers are gimmicks, aka the kind that say, in order to beat this mob, you must use this move or tactic. Gimmick enemies are the boost formula of combat. They're instant gratification. You use this and you win the interaction, similar to using a boss's weakness. There is no genuine sense of accomplishment, as that takes away the player's freedom or limits the opponent's. It's very clear to me they took a ton of inspiration from Devil May Cry, but it feels like they missed the idea behind it. Every single thing Dante and the other characters do is driven by their own character and identity. And that's where we need to get into identity. Sega, what is Sonic's identity as a game series? Is it going fast? Is it puzzle solving? Is it platforming? Is it character-driven action? Sonic Frontiers, like the last 20 years of this character's history, has an identity crisis. There's a reason that when people talk about Frontiers' narrative and writing, it is typically in a positive light. And there is a reason why when they talk about the world and gameplay, it's commonly negative. It's because the two feel like they're at odds with each other. It's like they looked at a sandbox game and thought, yo, let's just stick Sonic in there. And then they looked at Devil May Cry or other wild action games and just thought, yeah, let's make Sonic shoot energy blasts for some reason. Some of these ideas make sense, but then quite a few don't feel like Sonic should be the one doing them. Like, where's his breakdancing? He doesn't even do it when he gets a Chaos Emerald anymore or finishes a level. Even Sonic 06 had a flare attack that created a tornado. Why didn't that show up again? By the way, if anybody wants to learn how to do that, I'll make a tutorial on it. And now he's associated with a bunch of lightning powers thanks to the live action movie, but y'all remember when that was more of a Tails and Shadow thing, right? Sonic has always been the wind guy. I guess what I'm trying to say is, even if you ignore all of the hiccups in how the game actually plays, and even if some of these ideas are really cool, they don't feel like I'm playing as Sonic. It's also just boring to pilot him. Does that make sense? And if I may, I believe they looked at the wrong game to take inspiration from, provided you can divide Sonic neatly between action and movement. I believe the formula for a perfect Sonic action game was unlocked by Devil May Cry, but the movement was figured out with Spider-Man 2. For many, not just myself, Spider-Man, and especially the 2016 and second Raimi movie game, perfected character-driven movement. In my opinion, that is what Sonic's identity was during the Genesis era. If Mario was defined by platforming itself, Sonic was defined by being a character-driven platformer. And I believe this mindset was carried all the way until Sonic Heroes just completely abandoned the philosophy. Sonic, like Spider-Man, should be fun to move around, and he should be in an environment that benefits that. Furthermore, Sonic, just like Dante, should be fun to fight with, and he should be throwing down with enemies that will allow a freedom of expression and how the player chooses to get that ass. The problem is you can't really have the classic platforming staples in a game like that, right? Could you imagine Spider-Man with bottomless pits? Like a modern version of him? But here's a quick thought. Who needs them anymore? If Sonic falls off a platform, then the player has already fucked up. They were punished by missing the jump and now have to make their way back to where they fell. There doesn't need to be a death from the fall on top of that, especially since, you know, this is a character that can canonically survive a fall from space. For me, this just sums up every single problem Sega has ever had. They've always been the kind of company that looked at the competition and tried to one-up them rather than try to analyze what worked and applied it to their own image, because they didn't look at the identity they'd built up through serendipity. People kept coming back to the Sonic games because Sonic from its core was character-driven. Why does he roll up in a ball? Because hedgehogs do that in real life as a defensive measure. Why does he use it offensively? Because he's cocky and in your face. Why is his opponent human and uses technology? Because Sonic is an animal and represents nature. Now, why is Mario a plumber? Oh, because a lot of the game is underground. Why is Bowser a turtle dragon? Because he just is. But in Sonic, everything had a character-driven reason, even what little story there was. But I think that makes what I'm trying to say clear. But that brings me to the end of my video. And that's why, to me, Sonic Frontiers encapsulates both the best and worst of Sonic as a franchise. It's amazing just how much a different writing staff can change an entire game's reception. And to be honest with you, it's got me theory crafting what it would be like if Sega rented out the team behind Devil May Cry to see what they would do with Sonic from a gameplay perspective. Full disclosure though, I'll be the first person to admit that the added focus on characterization is what saved the game for me. And I totally understand if you might be one of the people that play Sonic to actually play the game. But as I pointed out before, I believe Mario is about platforming in and of itself, and I think Sonic was at his best when the platforming was driven by the character first. Which, while this game does bring some promising concepts to the table, still aren't fully realized. And good writing, while independent of the gameplay, can help elevate a piece from good to great, as well as vice versa. Can you imagine what this game would have looked like as a comic or an animated movie? That's how I myself can tell whether or not different aspects of entertainment, particularly video games, hold a lot of merit. If I take away the story of Mario Odyssey, the game is still a blast. But if I take away the gameplay, then the story is only charmingly mid. We've got a similar situation here. If I take the gameplay out of Sonic Frontiers, I'm left with one of the best Sonic stories we've had in such a long time. But if I take away the story, then I'm left with just another Sonic game trying to move forward but stumbling as they run. It might just be time to go back to walking for a little bit. But I'm done with my soapbox. Please, let me know your thoughts below, because as much fun as challenge runs are, they're not exactly my cup of tea, and I would love to tackle other topics y'all might recommend or just share my own theories with you. Finally, I know this is obnoxious, but just a quick friendly reminder, you can set your liked videos to private, as well as separate them into playlists, so there's no reason not to hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Liking a video is the single biggest metric that YouTube uses to promote content, so each one truly does help. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, but I've got to get back to my own training, so I'm bowing out for now. See you all next time.